Hi, this is Gabrielle Entile with Drug Topics. Today I'm going to be talking to Armand Balboni, MD, PhD, Chief Executive Officer of Appili Therapeutics, about Favipiravir, a potential COVID-19 treatment for elderly and long-term care populations. Before we get started, here's the latest news from drugtopics.com. A recent analysis showed a surge in prescription fills for hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, likely due to off-label prescribing. The JAMA study analyzed prescription patterns and found that hydroxychloroquine/chloroquine fills increased by 1,977% since last year. States are slowly easing their barriers to pharmacist-provided COVID-19 testing. In early April, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services authorized licensed pharmacists to order and administer COVID-19 tests approved by the FDA. By mid-May, about two-thirds of states had adjusted regulations for pharmacist-provided testing, but just a handful of pharmacies had managed to navigate the maze of federal, state, and supply chain practicalities. And that's the latest news from drugtopics.com. Dr. Balboni, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
You're CEO of Appili Therapeutics. Can you talk a little bit about what the company does and your day-to-day at the company during the pandemic as well?
The company was founded in 2015 as a singly focused company. And the idea was to tackle infectious diseases in a way that others don't or can't. And really what we do is we look for unmet need first. So is there a disease out there in the infectious disease world where folks are not able to readily find a solution? And we really try and match programs then with the disease. And we do that in a way that's agnostic to where something was created. And I think that's what's a little bit different here. We're all scientists, either by training or experience or both. We don't necessarily make the things in-house, but instead we go and find solutions to problems, which means that we have antifungals, antibiotics, 2 antibiotics, and now an antiviral program. And so for me, the daily mission is one of trying to keep the team moving forward with the portfolio of products which really touch on a number of really important diseases. And so I like to say that we're a socially conscious biotech. We both do good and we do well. And I know people roll their eyes when they hear that you can be a socially conscious biotech company. But we really are. We really try and find those tough problems, and then we really relish the challenge to go find solutions.
So what can you tell us about the phase 2 study with Favipiravir?
So Favipiravir is an already approved drug in Japan for influenza. There have been 2 phase 3s run in the US and a number of phase 3s in other locations. Now there are a couple of phase 3s running in Europe and 1 in Russia. But the Fujifilm studies really set the tone here, and which it means that it's been extensively studied. It's been in over 3,000 people. And so the safety profile is really well understood with this drug. It is again approved for pandemic flu in Japan and China. It's been recently approved for COVID-19 in Russia. And I expect that India will also end up with a COVID-19 approval, at least for emergency use or the equivalent, in the next couple of days. And so I think, again, this is really moving forward. I think the other thing we know about this drug is the mechanism of action. We know how it works. It targets the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which is a protein important for maturation, packaging, and then subsequent reinfection of other cells. So it's really important to get it on board early. Remdesivir, by the way, works the same way. And so I think scientifically we know how it works. And again, we have a very good understanding of the side effects profile. If I had to say there's one knock on this drug, and there is, it's the fact that in the preclinical studies, it was noted that there may be some teratogenicity or a fetal embryonic kind of effects in animals. And so we haven't seen that in people, but we have noted that in animals. And I suspect that that's a concern for folks going forward. It is, by the way, another reason that we thought that the long-term care setting was probably the most appropriate for this drug, the profile of the drug. If there are concerns about potential teratogenicity, the best way to deal with that is to simply not give it to people who may be at risk of getting pregnant or having children. And so I think, again, this population is fairly low risk in terms of that. And then I think, again, Favipiravir scientifically is very well understood. Lots of people have seen it, and it is moving forward in randomized controlled trials, which is incredibly important. And so I think for all of those reasons, it's a very solid program at this point. Not speculative, and certainly not a science project.
And can you talk about Appili's work with Canadian government agencies?
Sure. So, we started this program with this idea of a true public-private partnership. We are partnering with Fujifilm Toyama. We're the only company in the world that they've donated drug product to as part of our relationship with them. We have a long-standing and growing relationship with Fujifilm based on another program that we have of theirs, which I'm happy to talk about some other time. It's a great program, also an unmet need at antifungal. But it certainly set the basis for this relationship. As part of that, though, we saw the need to bring in other players. And we've done that by partnering with Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto and Dr. Alison McGeer, great ID specialist with deep ties to the long-term care network in Ontario, ran the influenza oseltamivir Tamiflu studies in that population. And of course, the Public Health Canada, the Health Canada reviewers have been just amazing, and working with us to very quickly review the packet, give us their feedback, and help guide us towards what is going to be the most beneficial trial for these residents at risk. And then finally, we're in continuing discussions with both the national and provincial governments in Canada with respect to funding. And it is our desire that they also step up and help pay for some of these. And so we're confident that in the end, we'll find that balance between public and private. And hopefully this is a model that others can use going forward, where companies take on a lot of that upfront risk and also leverage relationships in the business community, and the ability to move sometimes more nimbly just because of contracting, to be able to move products forward. I think it's a good model, and hopefully one that we can continue to use. We, by the way, as a company, work with lots of government agencies across all of our programs, and so we have significant relationships with NRC, for example, and the Public Health Canada and Health Canada and FDA and US DOD. So I mean, we certainly use this as part of our strategy, developing these relationships.
So with other potential treatments such as vaccines, some researchers have tried to expedite the process of getting vaccines to 15 months, although vaccines take much longer. What is the timeline for how long it would take for an antiviral to be authorized for COVID-19?
So small molecule drugs like Favipiravir, like remdesivir, with a very well understood mechanism of action, can be reviewed and approved much more quickly than vaccines can, because the vaccines are necessarily starting at zero, right, in terms of trying to build up that capability. Lots is known about Favipiravir. Again, it's been in over 3,000 individuals, more now. And so that builds out what's called the safety database. And really the regulatory agencies are most concerned, as they should be, with safety first. Efficacy comes afterwards, obviously as part of the entire package, but right up front, their job is to ensure that drugs are safe and efficacious for use in the population. And so it's really hard, as you correctly point out, to short circuit that experience in people to demonstrate safety and efficacy. And I think you need only look back to the history of vaccines and even drugs. Really, the regulatory agencies were created because there used to be many, many fewer safeguards for the population for introduction of new drugs. And I think a great example of that is certainly thalidomide, where it caused all kinds of birth defects as a small molecule. Even vaccines, the polio vaccine was a great success, but early on they tried to go very, very quickly, and there were some manufacturing problems. And so there really is a need for government oversight. I think they do it very, very well. So to that end, something like Favipiravir, which in the setting we're looking at for post-exposure prophylaxis, that trial is a little bit longer than a treatment trial, and just because of the numbers of people you need to get. And so I think that we're probably 6 to 9 months from top-line data, which will let us know whether or not this is working in this setting. We also plan to have our first residents in long-term care enrolled in the next week or so. So I think it's not unreasonable to think that we could have really good data in this setting for Favipiravir within by the fall, late fall. There are, as I said before, 16 other trials ongoing for Favipiravir around the world, randomized controlled trials. Now, we're the only long-term care setting trial for post-exposure prophylaxis, but there are treatment trials going on. And so I expect a readout from those trials, and the Russian trial in particular, probably first, and then a Fuji trial in Japan sometime in July. So I think this could move very, very quickly. And as I said before, I really do believe we're one well-controlled trial away from people really understanding that this drug works.
And as we head into what for many is almost their 3rd month at home because of COVID-19, what do you envision for Appili Therapeutics as we face potentially several more months of this pandemic?
Wow, I mean, I think this you know as well as anybody, having lived through this part as well. This is hard. I mean, it's hard. It's hard enough to run a clinical trial under the best of circumstances when you're not locked down, and then now go ahead and think about locking everybody down and trying to run a trial. The good thing for the company, of course, is that we are a virtual company. We have offices in Halifax. We have offices in Toronto. I spend a lot of my time in the U.S. Our chief medical officer is in Boston, and so we were using Zoom and other technologies to be able to meet virtually for a long time. And so for the day-to-day operations of the company, it's really not any different. I do think that everybody, yourself included, will have to start to think about selective reopening. What does that look like? And then how do we best leverage that without causing further outbreaks? I think for the long-term care setting that we're interested in, I think it's a little bit of the opposite. They're developing new protocols, thankfully, and procedures to help lock down the facilities more quickly. And so again, that certainly presents challenges for a clinical trial, but in this case, it's the right thing to do. So for all of those reasons, I think this has been tough on everybody. But as a company, we certainly have been used to doing this, and we're just continuing to drive on with all of our programs.
Great. So those are all the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or touch upon before we wrap up today?
And I would say that just my soapbox issue is running the randomized controlled trials. We've got to do the hard work to demonstrate whether or not these drugs work, or we run the risk of a hydroxychloroquine-like repeat in the market, which is not good for anybody. Nobody still knows whether or not that works. And by retracting studies and stopping and starting, it's really, really tough for the investigators to do the work of enrolling. And so best to not do publication by press release. And so hopefully we're avoiding that, and others have so far as well. But hopefully good things to come. At least we're asking the right question and running the right trial.
Dr. Balboni, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.